Alrighty then. Today we're going to look briefly at how you would upgrade your version 1 Tauri project to version 2 alpha. Important here, the alpha part. Tauri version 2 is still an alpha. You can get mobile support and whatnot with the alpha version, but it is still alpha. Changes are going to be made, and I will probably make a new video once we have both a beta and a stable release. So just keep that in mind as we're going through this video. You'll probably have to watch another of these videos later on, but I just wanted to make a video available right now so that some of the people that have issues right now with upgrading can get a better view on what's going on and how you can go about upgrading. So without further ado, let's just jump into it. So the first thing I want you to be aware of is that there's a next version of our documentation, which is available on Netlify with next-tauri.netlify.app. You can find the link in the video description on YouTube. Here you'll find a lot of guides. It's not stable and production ready or whatever yet. There will be changes to it, most definitely. But this is your primary go-to place for finding current documentation on Tauri in version 2. And the first thing you need to be aware of is, of course, dependencies. So if we go to, for example, Linux, the difference between version 1 and 2 with dependencies is primarily GTK. The web view is getting an upgrade. I don't know which of the other ones are upgraded, but I know that this is a pretty big deal. Not sure what's different with Mac, not sure what's different with Windows. I primarily use Linux through a dev container. But so you're aware, update your dependencies because you need to in order to use version 2. Let's get into it. Let's create 2 projects. Let's create migrate version 1, migrate version 2. CD version 2 code and code version 1. The reason we're making 2 of these projects is because I'm going to make, let's see, I want version 2 on the right actually. I'll make a setup for version 1 and then just initialize a version 2 project, and then we'll compare them and we'll go through all the steps required in order to upgrade. So the first thing we're going to do, as always in my streams, we're going to git clone https github.com/devcontainer2.devcontainer rmrf dev container, and we're just gonna do the same thing in the other one. There we go. Now we have a dev container folder for both. I spoke too soon because we're going to have to redo that because we're going to go into git checkout version 1. And now we can rmrf dev. So now we have a dev container for version 1 and a dev container for version 2. And we're going to reopen this in the container, and we're going to rebuild and open that. can actually be fine in both of them, even though they're still output. npx nuxi init, and that's because, for those of you who don't know, I really like using nuxt. And this will give us a quick and easy nuxt template to work with. And as I always do, I am going to put public and app inside source, nuxt config, ssr false, source gear source, pnpm I. And we're going to do the same thing in version 1. The first thing you can take note of here is the fact that we're doing the exact same steps for version 1 and version 2 in terms of the front end. You shouldn't have to update anything too major in the front end. It's primarily the back end that's going to be a little bit different. We're going to install that. We're going to install our extensions just because we can. Now we want to do pnpm add at Tauri apt/CLI. And this will give us version 1 on that one. And then we go, you can't quite see it because of the output, but pnpm add at Tauri apt/CLI at next. I actually want you to see that one. Ah, come on. Does it have to be in the way? Oh well. We'll figure that out anyway. So what I ran was pnpm add at Tauri apt/CLI at next. So now we have the CLI set up for version 1. And what we're going to do is we're going to run pnpm. All right, first we're going to add the Tauri command. We might as well do that right away on version 2 as well, because we're going to need it there as well. pnpm Tauri dev. And why did it panic? Couldn't recognize the kernel as a Tauri project. All right, because I forgot to run init. There we go. Really annoying that. There we go. Okay. So we can name it Nuxt app. We can just go with Nuxt app dist 3000, and we're going to do pnpm dev and pnpm generate. pnpm Tauri dev. And here we're gonna run pnpm Tauri init. Just gonna go okay on all those. And here we're gonna run pnpm dev, pnpm generate. Just to speed things up later, because I don't actually want to run version 2 yet. We're just gonna start building it. And they're off to the races. As you can see, there are more dependencies in version 2 than there is in version 1. Not by a huge lot though, and the biggest ones are still the same. I'm not entirely sure which dependencies exactly have changed, but just be aware that there's a couple extra dependencies in version 2. If you're interested in security aspects of your project, then, you know, look into the changes to the dependencies so you're aware of the kind of stuff that Tauri uses. We do Tauri is audited in such a way where you shouldn't have to worry about it because we already check it, but yeah. dependencies are different. And there we go. Now we have a version 1 app. So we're going to just close that, stop building that one, and instead run pnpm Tauri dev. I did run pnpm. While we're waiting, we might as well start looking at the projects a bit. There's our version 2 app. As you can see, nothing visually different about them. They are literally identical. Your front end doesn't have to look different just because you've upgraded. Let's look at the projects, shall we? So they both have the dev container. They both have the Nuxt folder. pnpm store, yep. Node modules, yep. Source, yep. Contents of source, literally identical. Gitignore and npm, everything is identical right now, except for the source Tauri folders. And this should be the case for you as well. You shouldn't have to make a lot of changes outside of this folder. You may have to make some folders or changes, but shouldn't have to make too many. The biggest change you need to be aware of is the source folder, namely that nowadays we have a lib.rs file here. In version 1, we just have the main rs file. In version 2, we have the lib.rs file. And the important difference here to be aware of is that Tauri is nowadays primarily developed as a library. When you still have main rs, you're still building a regular binary for desktop targets. Hence why you have CFG desktop here. And that part is still the same. You still have the configurator, you still have function main, but instead of putting all your logic inside main rs, you're importing the library, the run function, and running that. And you only do it on desktop targets. If you have a custom project or a project with a lot of custom code that needs to be in the main function, you could make this, change it like this. Now this applies to this entire closure. So if you had something that needs to be ran before or after your application, this is a valid way of getting something to run. Like the app has exited and the is starting. So these should run before and after now. So that's a little bit different from how you did it before. But all you need to have and what you get in a standard template is just this. So going from version 1, move your code into librs instead. And as you can see, if we compare these, Tauri Builder Default, you're actually doing literally the exact same code. The only difference here is that instead of being in function main, we're being in public function run. And it has to be decorated with the mobile entry point. This, by the way, means that it's only applicable, like this attribute is only applied when we're on mobile and then it becomes a mobile entry point. So don't worry about like, oh, we're on desktop. What does this do for desktop target? No, this attribute is only applied on mobile. That's what the first part does. The second part is the actual attribute that gets applied. So if we are to convert our version 1 project to version 2, this is the first change we're going to look at. We're going to create librs. We're going to create a pub function run. We're going to config attribute mobile Tauri mobile entry point. And then everything you have inside the main function, you're going to just copy paste over into this function. And now our librs should look more or less identical. And yeah, they do. The next update is to main rs. You still need this part, but we have shortened that down a little bit. Don't remember. I believe we tested this at some point where they're identical in functionality. This is just a tiny bit shorter. So don't worry about too much about what that update is. It's just shorter. Fewer lines of code to keep track of. And then we have actually importing and running your project. Config desktop app lib run. And that's it for the source code update. The next part that you're gonna have to do is update cargo.toml. Cargo.toml needs to be updated primarily with the lib section, and your dependencies need to be updated. So if we look at this, we're gonna need to set this to 2.0.0-alpha.7 for the Tauri version, and the Tauri build version is going to be 2.0.0-alpha.4. You don't need to synchronize the versions here. You just need to use the latest one of each of them. We might as well update that to 64. Then we're going to add the lib section. So anywhere in here, you can add lib, name equals app_lib, rate type has to be static lib, cdlib, or cdynamic library, as well as rlib. And I don't know if static lib is actually ever used. I think it's just the cdlib, cdynamic library, that gets used for primarily Android. I think that's also what we use for iOS. I think the other two are primarily there in case you want to use it as a pure Rust project. But this is the biggest magic of it all, compiling it as a cdynamic library. And something I want to mention here as well is that usually your package won't just be called app. It'll be called something appropriate for your project. For us, we named our app Nuxt app, and usually you'll have Nuxt app. This, if you change the name, default run should also be set to the same, because this is basically going to be the binary name, and this should also be the binary name for what the default is to run. And the library should always be suffixed with _lib. But you can change this to Nuxt app. But the important thing to keep in mind here is that we said applib here. So if I do Nuxt applib here, I believe the dashes are turned into underscores. Should be anyway. Other changes we need to make? Well, let's see. As far as I know, that should be the only ones we need to make. All right. I'm not entirely sure why this has been changed, but it has changed, so we're going to use it as intended, namely removing the default protocol. And if we now do pnpm Tauri dev. All right, another thing we need, right, concatenate hyphens. Library names cannot contain hyphens, so that's why that was complaining. Oh, what's going on? Okay. Next thing, we need to have the CLI updated for the latest version. So pnpm add at Tauri apps /CLI at next. And we need to do the same thing for the API. Now we have the CLI and the API at their latest versions on the next branch, pnpm Tauri dev. And this should now be a functioning project, I believe. Can I refer Tauri That's odd. So for some reason it can't find 200 alpha. So what could the reason for that be? Well, the only reason I can think of for that we're gonna come back to that later, because I have a hunch that this will be fixed by recreating the dev container, which we're gonna do now, and we're going to do it by removing the dev container folder. Then git clone https github.com/simonhill/dev container. And then, since we chose the clone method, we're going to remove dev container git. So now you've cloned my environment. And this is by default a version 2 environment, which means that we can rebuild the container. Always retry at least once. That looks better. And once you can see your files, you should be good to go with running a terminal. It's still very weird. I'm just gonna make sure that the issue isn't as stupid as something like this. The only other issue I can think of is this nano config toml. Using the sparse protocol is the only thing that I can think of. All right, we might have to also run cargo update. And now, since I disabled the sparse protocol, this is going to be a little bit slower than it is otherwise. I'm not sure why it has issues resolving the Tauri crate, because as you can see on one side, On the version 2 side, it's fine. It can find it, no problem. Version 1 side is having issues finding it. And the only thing I can think of is that the sparse protocol that I have enabled by default in the Docker file, if you wanted to disable it, by the way, you would just go down here and remove these lines. Because what it does is basically just switch from using Git to using HTTP requests to resolve crate. We're going to remove the target folder and we're going to run cargo clean Tauri dev. The car patch opts for the work candidate version from which did Tauri. Oh, did I? Yeah. Yeah. So that was a dumb error. Make sure you know how to spell alpha. Helpful tip. As always, alpha equals alpha, not alpa or appa. Almost done. As always, GDK is a big one. I'm considering setting up something to speed up the build a little bit more by pre-building it. Here we go! A version 2 project. We should actually be able to just screw it. We have a version 2 project up and running, and as you can see, didn't have to change anything outside of source Tauri other than if you're using my dev container, make sure you're using a version 2 dev container. And in source Tauri, the biggest updates, or the only updates we had to do, was add the library, update your dependency for Tauri build and the Tauri dependency. We removed the default feature because for some reason we no longer do that. And I didn't have to update anything in TauriConf JSON. That's not necessarily to say that there won't be any updates later on. Alpha is alpha, but I didn't have to update anything now. And the build file remains the same. Yeah, there really wasn't anything else we had to do. Just make sure you adapt your project to the whole library-based approach. And as a quick, just reminder of why we use the library approach, it's not because it's better, it's just because it's a technical requirement by, for example, Android. Android doesn't let you use Rust unless you implement it as a library. It has to be an imported library that you then run. So don't think about it too much. It doesn't change anything in terms of performance or how it runs. You're still on desktop using main RS and making a regular binary as with version 1. It's just that now we have better support for the making your app a library instead and deploying it to more targets. And that's really all that the library approach is there for. The last part I want to do is, as always, I want to just go over the documentation a bit. I didn't follow an exact tutorial this time. We will definitely have some migration tutorials at some point. But for now, not much to say. As far as I know, the dependencies are correctly updated here. The big part here to look at for mobile development is that there's some changes to your front end if you're going to support it, probably at least if you're using Vite, Next.js, or Webpack. So when you're using mobile development, the reason you have to make changes is because of how your mobile device can find the front end server. So it's not technically required to make the front end work. It's just in a development setting, you need to update these values so that you can actually, so that the device can find it. And so far we only have documentation for Vite, Next.js, and Webpack, though that should for most people be sufficient. I believe that for trunk, if you're using Rust, as long as you use the version that Amr Bashir has so kindly made an update for, as you can see here, in the version 2 dev container, I install trunk from Amr Bashir, who is, by the way, one of the working group and actually a core member at Amr Bashir, or at Tauri. So he's not just some random developer. He is a core member of Tauri, and he has a slightly patched version of trunk to make it possible to use it for version 2. And that should probably be mentioned somewhere in this document. But we're working hard on the documentation, and it's by no means finished. They do go over some of what I have gone over here, even though, honestly, this is way too much unnecessary code, I would say, for what we just accomplished. I guess this is a good part to be aware of. If you need to switch between mobile and desktop for your commands, you can just add the decorator or attribute config desktop or config mobile. If you keep the function name the same, then this effectively works as switching between the two. And also, just as a note on this macro means that both of these actually exist in your end source code, which is why I prefer the other approach I showed you. So if you have this for mobile now, this will actually remove that code. If you had what they have here, in this example, both of these blocks actually exist on the target device, because this config, this if statement, is not handled at build time. It is converted to code at build time, but it's both of these are still in there, which is why the way I tend to do it is how I showed you at the start, which is making this and then config, and usually what I do is not desktop. So this is how you could set up the exact same code. The difference is that with the if statement, both clauses actually exist in the final product. Here we're at build time actually removing this part. So there's a difference there in how that functions. I tend to use this approach. Some people like the runtime approach. It's up to you how you develop it. Anyway, I do believe that is roughly all I had to show you today. I will be making a new, more in-depth video at some point for upgrading from version 1 to version 2 once we have a stable release. That's it for this video. Thanks for stopping by. See ya.